Welcome, Buff fans, to another episode of the Primetime Night Owls. I'm Brian Howell from BuffZone, and glad to be joined by Matt Smith once again. And Matt, we're going to talk a bunch of things Buffs this week as we get ready, continue gearing up for spring ball, which starts about 8 days from now as we're doing this. And so,
Yeah.
Coach Prime is back in the building, and you know. Talking to the team during a workout this morning and things like that. So it's getting close. And but first, before we flip the page to this year's team, let's look back at a couple guys from this last year's team because Matt, as we saw this weekend, four Buffs were invited to the NFL Combine. Two actually participated. I don't think any of us or either of us expected Shaduer Sanders or Travis Hunter to participate, but Jimmy Horn and LaJohntay Wester did.
Yeah, last week we talked a little bit because Travis hadn't made his declaration official yet that he wasn't going to do anything out there
Yeah.
except for meet for teams, which again, and I think I even brought it up when we talked about this, made sense for him.
Mhm.
He if he did it, he would just prove to everybody how ridiculously talented he is, but
Yeah.
there's still no point, just as there wasn't for Shadur. Although, again, and we spoke about this last week, which we'll get into, but fascinating to see the narratives coming out of the combine for everybody involved. But yes, neither one of those two guys participated, but good to see at least, Travis was there, but he wasn't as maybe visible as Shadur was. Shadur, I would say probably, I don't know, maybe takes it upon himself to be that face, of the Buffs, of that coalition, of the
Yeah.
leader, and it probably, to be honest with you, helps his own narrative around the league about, because look, every time you go to the NFL Combine, all you hear is, well, he shook every hand of our producer, well, he was at the show, and that's not just Shadur, that's everybody, right? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
lot of guys. And so everything you do is under a microscope, and I certainly think it was awesome, first of all, just to see him out there supporting everybody and, with Jimmy and LaJohntay just kind of getting in their ears. But yeah, Brian, we're getting closer and closer now. It's still a ways away, though.
Yeah, and really true to the nature of both those young men, that Shador would be a little bit more visible because he's the more outgoing guy publicly than
Yep.
Travis is. Travis is obviously much more, private and reserved publicly, and so it was not a surprise to see Shador out there a lot. He was out there on the field watching other receivers, run through their routes and do all their things. So I have to ask you, was there as much criticism for Cam Ward not throwing as there was Shador?
Oh, no, no, there wasn't.
It
No, there
is it
wasn't. It's a
yeah,
different set of rules for Shador.
it is for sure. And yeah, it was amazing to see, the narratives coming out of there, and ESPN talk about it forever about a mistake. And, a couple of those analysts, tweeted out or retweeted a video of one of their analysts talking about just, saying Shador's making a mistake. Well, Cam Moore didn't throw either, and neither did, guys in previous years. So we talked about it last week, but it was just kind of funny to see nobody really seemed to be bothered by Cam Moore not doing it. So,
No, it's a different rule for the Sanders family. It just
mhm.
is. And it's so funny because you saw Kevin Stefanski, who was the head coach of the Browns, get up there and talk glowingly about him. And certainly you saw multiple different reports about teams finally met with him. And oh my gosh, what a great player, what a great young man. And I was laughing specifically, Ian Rappaport. Um, he was the one who originally reported that he wasn't going to participate in any combine drills, and he buried the story until the combine was halfway over, that Shador was so great on the phone when he, FaceTimed Coach Prime, and Shador wasn't talking like a 20-year-old, it was like a 30-year-old. And I sat there and I was like, why would you not immediately put that out with your initial
Right.
report? Why would
Yeah.
you wait a week? Again, there's I don't know what it is, Brian. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
They do things differently, and the NFL is basically a conformity league, right? Anything that makes you unique or different or fun, they typically try and rein all that in. And so it'll probably be a perpetual push-pull with Shadur and the NFL culture, quite frankly. I
Yeah.
mean, he's not going to do things the way that a lot of people expect him to do it, and he'll probably ruffle some feathers that way, just like his dad did. So it's just unfortunate because, again, you have so many of these narratives that essentially accumulate, and it's kind of like the boulder rolling down the hill, and oh, it's this and it's that, and now he's sliding in mocks, and again, I remember the other day watching an interview with Sean Payton from the Combine with Peter Schrager of Fox, and even Sean Payton said, "Look, after the Combine last year, Bo Nix wasn't our guy. There's still tons of time. Like no teams are have fully decided yet. They're still gathering information, and there are still private workouts. There's still pro days, so it's still
Yeah.
very early on in this process. It's just funny because Shadur hasn't lifted a finger, and analysts would love to have you think that he's now all of a sudden going to be like a lower first round pick. I saw some jabroni from NFL.com
I was
just
just
put
going to
out there
mention
that
that. Yeah.
yeah, that Shador was going to be the 29th overall pick because some team traded back up into the first round to get him. It's it's wild because this isn't happening for anybody else. And I think it is also very interesting. Abdul Carter could not participate at the combine because he was recovering from a shoulder injury from the college football playoff. And it turns out he's got to have massive lower body surgery. So it's interesting. You talk about major red flags there. And the only other stuff you hear about from Shador is personality and it's personal, non football stuff. And it's funny because I mean, just as well as I do. When you see that stuff, you go, "Oh, well, that person doesn't know who Shadur is, clearly."
Yeah.
Or that's again
Right.
the report Josina Anderson put out there today about how one quarterback coach thought he was arrogant, and then went on to continue in her little post she put out there that quarterback coach doesn't like the culture of athletes being paid and being financially stable, and it's those guys kind of expose themselves. And I remember, and screw it, I don't care. What do I owe them? The Broncos scouts specifically were not high on Shador all year long because of a lot of that stuff. And again, we talked about it last week. Prejudices show up, and it's not just in media ranks. It's also among scouting ranks from people who don't really do the work in headline scout, and that's what you see, right? And and I have no problem saying it. I don't owe them anything. It was foolish from the Broncos scouts, right? Like they're not paying attention to the right stuff, in my opinion. And you know, because this is the cusp and the turning point in college football where players are now coming in that are financially stable, that have power, that have brand power, teams are a little intimidated because if there's one sport where the league holds all the cards except for maybe at one position, and that's quarterback, then let's be honest, those teams are not going to like anybody else threatening their total control and power. So
Yeah.
it's been fascinating to watch it unfold. And again, all without Shador lifting a finger, right?
Yeah. And that analyst you're talking about from NFL.com in his previous mock had Shador sixth. So he's sixth and then doesn't do anything at the combine and drops to 29th,
Yeah.
which is, I don't understand that one. But yeah, I think Shador did the right thing. We talked about it last week. And that when the questions are about, they don't really know who he is and his personality, things like that, he was doing the right thing by doing interviews. And if one quarterback coach doesn't like him, great. Your team doesn't get it. Your team won't take him, and you guys can watch him, beat your team for the next several years. So it doesn't. It's fine if one doesn't like you. It's a problem if 32 don't like you, or feel that way, or 22 feel that way, or whatever. So the only thing I liked about that mock you're talking about, where Shador was 29th, is that it was the Browns trading back up, who also took in this mock took Travis at 2. So the only thing I liked about that was it
Was
showed
it be together?
Travis and Shador being on the same team, which
I would
now,
be eventually be right.
well, Cleveland's not exactly where I'd love to see that happen, but
Anywhere those two guys go, they'll
yeah,
influence it
I know, but
highly.
I know
Yeah.
that wouldn't be the top choice. But yeah, I would be
I'll take it
stunned.
anywhere.
I'd be
I don't care if
stunned
it's
if
Cleveland.
Shador. That's the only mock I've seen where Shador is outside of the top 9. So so to go 29 is insane. But yeah, I think when you get to know Shador, I think that you like him, and you say, wow, okay, he's a confident young man. But the other knock I've seen on him is he doesn't show humility, and I think he does. When you listen to like, he stood up there for 15 minutes or whatever it was during a press conference the other day, and if you listen to him, he does show humility, and that he's like, I know what my weaknesses are. I know I've got stuff to work on. That's showing humility to me. That's, it's not showing it if you walk in saying, I know everything, I know how to play this game. He's showing a willingness to work. He's always shown that. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what he does. And we'll talk about it more, but I'm looking forward to seeing what he does in his future. And we'll see him throw here, hopefully a pro timing day in Boulder here in a month or so, and two guys who will catch passes from him, Jimmy Horn and LeJounte Wester. They did perform at the combine and look like they did pretty well out there.
Yeah, Jimmy maybe not as fast of a number as I thought he might, but shoot, Brian, I mean, this has all changed in like the last 10 years. I mean, 10 years ago, 4.46 is you don't turn your nose up at that, right? It's all of a
Yeah.
sudden we've got these, speed demons and track stars really starting to make a name for themselves in the NFL. I anticipate he'll run better at CU's Pro Day. He did have the fastest gauntlet time, though, I saw among any receiver who ran it at the combine, which was great to see. LeJounte out there, I think he was fine. The 4.46 number for him, I think, is pretty good. I honestly, I don't know if I would run again if I were him. I mean, maybe he will, but that's a pretty good number. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody ever accused LeJounte of having like elite end speed. It's more about agility, hands, quickness, short area burst, all that type of stuff that really is the what he hangs his hat on as far as his game goes. So yeah, good to see for both of those guys. I think they'll both be mid round picks, mid to late round picks. I highly anticipate both of them to be drafted, as I do Will Shepherd. Was a little disappointed for Will that he didn't get to display his skills there, as everybody else. But just because of career resume, I was pretty surprised that, again, we brought it up several times now, that he wasn't invited. So he'll have his chance at the pro days assuredly, and Big 12 pro days coming up too, isn't it?
Yeah, in a couple of weeks down
Yeah.
in Dallas, and yeah, a bunch of receivers at the combine. Jimmy and LeJounte were not even top 20 as far as speed, but it's funny that Jimmy had the fastest gauntlet time because I was just gonna say as you were talking there, I think Jimmy's football speed is top end.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's funny that you bring it up like that. And the only sorry to cut you off. The only reason I laugh at that because I almost sent out a post when he ran like, hey, he's actually faster with the ball in his hands. It reminds
yeah,
me of like Nathan McKinnon or Connor McDavid in hockey. It's like, no, when you get the puck on their stick, they're actually faster than they are if they're just skating. So
right.
he's one of those guys. He's a gamer for sure.
And it's sort of it's different, but like it's not they're not the same player at all. But like Laviska, I thought was faster with the ball in his hand. Laviska Chenault, than he would have been running a 40. I think Travis is almost the same way. But Jimmy, for me, for sure, just get him in space, and nobody's going to catch him.
Yeah.
Now he may not be the a top 20 speed receiver you want when you line him up on the track, but put the pads on, put the ball in his hands. Yeah, I'll take him.
Yeah,
So
he
I,
flies.
and so it wasn't surprising to me to see the gauntlet speed, and that's where maybe he shines a little bit more at the pro days where he gets more of a chance to show that. But yeah, I mean it's the NFL draft, like you said, it's coming up, but there's still a long way to go. I mean, I think it's what 6-7 weeks away at this point, and the Big 12 Pro Day is in like 2 weeks from now as we're doing this, and then I think CU's Pro Timing Day is like in a month, so there's still plenty of time and plenty of time. We'll talk about these guys, and but let's move on to spring ball because it starts next week, and we're gonna have more of a full spring preview show next week. Spring ball starts on Tuesday, so we're going to have more of a spring preview show on Monday next week. But they're obviously working out. Coach Prime's in the building, and we want to talk about some of the guys that we're kind of expecting to step up a little bit this spring.
Yeah, I was thinking about it last year when spring ball rolled around. It felt like, oh gosh, I mean, we're already here. Season just ended,
Mhm.
but that's the difference ending on a 9-4 season versus a 4 or 9-3 season versus a 4-8 season, right? It feels like a big difference to me at least. So I'm actually ready to go going again. Normally I don't feel like that for spring ball because it's just like, oh, what hope do you have for the future?
Yeah.
But it's certainly different now. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I am. I am sure that Coach Prime's itching just to get everything going again. So for him, it probably fired him up to be back out there.
Yeah. So let's talk about some players. And um, I had an article the other day where I was talking about some guys that are coming back from last year that could have a chance to step up and have a bigger role this season. And it obviously starts in the spring. 44 returning scholarship players, and although I probably didn't do a good job explaining the parameters in this article, I'm going to call these under the radar type guys, guys that maybe you don't really think of first, but some guys that I think with a really good spring mat, could make an impression on this team. And I'm going to give you my five, and then see if you have anybody that you want to add to this list. But Ryan Staub, I think, is one that is the forgotten man in the quarterback race, and I totally understand why. Caden Salter coming in from Liberty, and then Juju Lewis, obviously the 5-star, but he's here for a reason. So I think with a good spring, maybe he puts himself in that race. Brandon Hood's a running back I'm really looking forward to seeing. I mean, I in this group, he was the one that didn't play last year, and I think he's got really good speed and really good upside. Terrell Timmons is not talked about a lot. He's a senior receiver, that was hurt a little bit last year, and obviously was playing behind a bunch of talented guys, but could be a highly productive receiver for them. And then on defense, a couple of guys, Jeremiah Brown, who certainly has a shot to get into that competition for the starting role at linebacker, and then Savion Riley, who we really only saw like once last year when Cam went out early in game one, and Savion Riley played really well. But then the rest of the year, he was obviously sitting behind, Cam, Shiloh, and then Carter Stoutmeyer kind of took over that role. But those are five guys under the radar, Matt. And we'll get to some other categories, but under the radar guys coming back that I think maybe with a good spring, they turn some heads a little bit.
Yeah, it's a pretty good list there. I like the Savion Riley name. I think a lot of fans have probably forgotten about him a little bit. I
Yeah.
really like him. He's
hmm
an
hmm
excellent young man, really smart, really well spoken, really enjoy talking to him, and I think he'll fit in really well. He's excited. He kind of knew last year he had to wait his turn a little bit. And then
Yeah.
again, like you mentioned, kind of called into emergency service during week one during that North Dakota State game. But that's a name you definitely have to watch out for. I definitely wouldn't write him off. I mean, I think conventional wisdom would probably point you to Tawfiq Bayard and Carter Stoutmeyer potentially as your starting safeties.
Yeah.
However, you can't count out Savion Riley, and you also have some other names in the mix there, certainly. So I definitely think that's a good one. Brandon Hood is a name that you and I kind of spoke about all year, where the running game was such a disaster at one point. We kind of said, well, I mean, does it really hurt you to give the kid a couple of touches? I mean,
Right.
you can just redshirt him just the same, but they didn't want to do that. They didn't feel he was ready. Again, I thought I saw in well off that conditioning might have been a problem, but I remember watching them at that one open practice in the fall, and he's not a really tall guy, but he's thick. He's
Yeah.
built kind of
hmm
like a brick shithouse, kind of. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
tough to take down, and it'll be interesting to see what Falk and company can get out of him, because if he's anything like his brother, he's got a really, really highly competitive spirit. So that is a name I'll certainly be watching for. And outside of that, Staub, look, maybe it all depends. I think for the purposes of what you're talking about, yeah, if he has a really good spring, then maybe he's in the conversation. But I mean, I would be shocked if we roll into week one and he's one or two on the depth chart. Although maybe not, because uh, he certainly has a leg up on Juju as far as what they're trying to do, comfortability level. Obviously skill will rise to the top eventually, but Juju's younger, so we'll see how that plays out. Like I said, Ryan Staub continually kind of is that one guy that, well, do you need him? Maybe.
Yeah.
And so
hmm
because you're in that position, you're kind of indispensable, because backup quarterback nowadays is not an easy position in college to fill unless you're one of these powerhouse programs. And I think on that note specifically, when Coach Prime landed the commitment from Juju, our assumption was is that he was going to go right away, and how quickly we have all of a sudden switched to being like, no, I don't think that he's going to be able to beat out Caden Salter. And obviously, this is all without one official snap
Right.
having taken place. But I do think it's interesting, because it just kind of goes to show how committed Juju would be to the process, even saying, yeah, I'm fine with the competition, and then having Salter come in here. And look, I mean, right now, I would say he's fighting an uphill battle to be the guy on day one, and he expressed tons of interest into being that guy. But it
Yeah.
kind of shows me that maybe he's a little bit more committed for the long haul, and maybe he understands a little bit more, and maybe that experience through playoffs, kind of taught him, all right, well, I got this down, and all the while he's still just the other day won National Quarterback of the Year award or whatever that was that I saw
Yeah.
him at a
hmm
banquet.
Yeah, and I'll say too real quick. I'm not projecting that Staub's going to be
I
a
know.
top two quarterback for the Buffs, but I think that to me it speaks to the fact I think they're three deep at quarterback. To where I would feel good about. I mean, if you're in a situation next year where you have to put Ryan Staub in a game, if he's your number three, I'd feel okay. I'd feel okay with that. And he's a guy I don't think we should write off because he's now in his third year
Yeah.
with this program. And I know Shermer hasn't been the offensive coordinator the whole time, but he's essentially, Shermer's been around almost the whole time. So he knows Pat Shermer. And so that's the only reason I'm mentioning Staub is like, I don't think we should write him off just yet. Um, I would expect Salter and Juju to be the top two, but I don't want to write off Ryan Staub at this point.
The other name you mentioned was Terrell Timmons,
Hmm.
and there were a couple moments early in the year, especially in fall camp, that I liked the potential that he brought to the table. For
Hmm.
some reason, and certainly injury played a part of it, but whenever he did get his opportunities on the field, it felt like he fell short of them. This is going to be such a highly competitive group. I think you'll see a ton of different guys get snaps this year, quite honestly, because I don't think it's as clear of a pecking order as it was last year. There's a few who we know will be heavily involved, but there's a lot of mouths to feed there, and
Yeah.
you're going to have to outdo everybody else. And the addition of Joseph Williams, and bringing back to the equation Cam Michael, there's all of those factors included, along with Quan Alex Farrakhan and Adrian Wilson and Quentin Gibson. So yeah, man, I really think that receiver room should be probably the most competitive group on the team as far as just day to day in and out of practice, because every single day probably have an opportunity to earn some playing time if you bring it.
Yeah. And Timmons is interesting because I think there is some upside there, but 18 catches in 3 years of college football. I think he's due for a breakout year, and there's an
Good,
opportunity there. I think, and
for sure.
we've talked about it before, but I expect the Millers, Omarion and Draylon, to be the top two receivers. I think Joseph Williams is going to be up there. Cam McKell, who you mentioned, um, Quentin Gibson. I actually ran into him the other day. He is small, you know, but you look at the tape and it's like, yeah. Doesn't matter if you're small. If you're that fast and nobody can tackle you, then great. Put the ball in his hands. So I'm looking forward to seeing him as well. Obviously, those young receivers, they're going to add to that room. We know that there's only 8 on scholarship right now. They've typically had close to 15, so they're going to add to that room. But Terrell is a guy that I think could be in line. For something bigger. So we'll see. But I
Yeah.
agree with you that that room this spring could be extremely competitive, especially with Omarion back, and you love seeing that because I think there's star potential all over that guy.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. He's got to prove he can be that guy.
Hmm.
As Coach Prime says, he's him every day that ends with a Y, and
Yeah,
that's what Omarion has to prove, right? We know he can be him occasionally, but can you be him every time you step out onto the field? And that'll be part of his growing process as he recovers from his injury. But again, kind of to that point, just as I said, Terrell's got a lot of competition there. Anytime you make a play, it matters.
yeah.
And they don't really discriminate based on politics. It's about who's making the most plays. I mean,
Yep.
for the most
Hmm.
part, for the most part. So we'll see how that all plays out. And again, it could look different coming out of spring, because you could have some guys that just go, I'm not going to be
Yeah.
up to stuff here, or I'm not going to pass muster here. So let me see if I can't, try my hand somewhere else, and they'll have that opportunity. And then, conversely, does CU feel like they do have that number one that they want? Is there a guy in the portal coming out of spring that really intrigues them after going through spring and being like, well, I don't know if we have this skill set or that skill set, or a guy who's as experienced, we'll see how it all plays out. But as of right now, the receiver room, if we could watch spring ball based upon what we'll be able to see in well off, that would certainly be a position I'd have my eye very closely paying attention to.
Yeah. Any other returning guys that you're looking forward to, seeing this spring that could make that jump? I mean, there's obviously a lot of holes to fill on this roster, guys that are now preparing for the NFL draft.
Yeah, I think I'd probably have to go to the offensive lineman. those
Yeah.
guys that have stuck
Mhm.
around, the
Mhm.
Kareem Hardens, I doubt Philip Houston will participate at all in spring. I'm sure he's just rehabbing. But,
Mhm.
guys like that, Tyler Brown, do you make a jump there? Jordan Seaton, this is a huge year for him, both leadership wise and play on the field wise. I'm definitely looking at offensive line and certainly probably both in the trenches because that's where you have a lot of your returners, at least defensively, right? With Amari and Quinn Barnes and Taurine Carter and some of these guys back there. Is Tawfiq back?
Yep.
Tawfiq
Uh-huh.
Thomas? Yeah.
Yep, he
Yeah.
is.
So that's another guy who contributed last year. I like Tawfiq a lot. So, you got a lot of guys in the middle, but to bring it back to one thing you said, this is going to kind of skirt the boundary or the parameters of the type of player we're looking at. But just as a preview for what we'll talk about next week, and we spoke about it last week, is just that linebacker position. You brought up Jeremiah Brown, but French, Hughes, all these guys, Wester. That is a position that we're probably not going to be able to make any sort of real judgment on it, even based upon the spring game, because I doubt everybody participates in the spring game. Maybe they will,
Yeah.
but that is a position that I am entirely unconvinced that they're done yet at. So I'd like to see that a little bit too.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you on that, and we'll talk about some position battles next week, obviously. But you mentioned Amari McNeil. He's one of those guys out of the original parameters I mentioned of unheralded. This is a guy that we've seen a lot now. That I think Amari McNeil is one of the veteran guys that I'm looking forward to making that big jump because we've seen him be a productive player the last couple of years. I don't think the numbers are a whole lot different one year over the next, but I thought he played much better this last year than the previous year, and I think he's got a real shot to be maybe the leader of that defensive line group, and I'm looking forward to him taking a big leap this year and being one of those guys that you count on week after week.
100%. 100%. I mean, he was briefly teammates with Caden Salter, right? So you kind of look at leadership tent poles and guys who know each other and
Mhm.
are kind of ready for that moment. He would fit the mold of a guy like that. He came on really strong the end of that first year. The end of the first year, he was playing really well. And then the beginning of this year, he kind of fell out of the rotation, fell out of the equation.
Yeah,
Then during the middle of the year, popped off with a couple big ones and then kind of, whistled off as he, fizzled out as he got hurt at the end of the season. So yes, that's a guy that from beginning to end, can you be an every down type of guy for us that we're looking for, which I think all the potential's there, but again, there's going to be a lot of competition. So how bad do you want it? And that is going to be the theme of
hmm,
this team, I think, because you're going to have a lot of guys. It's gonna be a transition coming off of Shadur and Shiloh and Travis and that whole class now to a group of very talented, but in some cases largely unproven. And like I said, this is as one of those players who's fighting for a position, all you could ask for entering spring because there's very little that's set in stone. I would
yeah,
say that I mean outside of like the cornerback room, you know what I mean? I don't know how much else is really set in stone. So it's there's plenty of opportunity to be had if you approach it with the correct attitude.
yeah. And another one of those guys I think is Colton Hood. You mentioned cornerback room, a guy that we saw a little bit this last year and looked really good when he was out there. But what kind of role does he have? With Hodge and McKinney back, um, is Colton Hood that other corner and Hodge stays in the in the nickel spot? I would think so, but is Hood ready to take that take over Travis's role? And at least on defense, he's not going to play both sides, I don't think. But is Colton Hood ready for that? The flashes he showed, I would say yes, but he's a guy that's got to go out there and prove it. And you mentioned how bad do you want it? I think he wants it pretty bad, but it's now you got to go prove it.
Yeah, and I like that you brought that up because not just Colton Hood, but we heard DJ McKinney say some pretty lofty things
Hmm.
about his expectations for himself this upcoming season too. And the only first of all, like both those guys, I think both those guys are capable. This isn't what I'm saying. Talk is cheap though.
Yeah,
Like it's real easy to be there in New York and see the bright lights and the big stage and see Travis walking in with the trophy and be like, "Hey, I can do that." Until it comes time on a Monday when you don't want to get up and you don't want to do it, and can you outwork the ghost? That's what I always talk to guys I train with about is just, hey man, if you're sitting down, he's working, and that's got to be the mentality that you bring if you want to be great.
Mhm.
And both of those young men talked about their desires to be great. So again, how badly do you want it? Your actions speak far louder than what you have to say.
Yeah, that's for sure. And there's so many guys that have an opportunity starting this spring to to prove themselves. And another one, a newcomer, I want to mention to you because we've seen him in a couple well-off videos. And it's at a position of need. Zach Atkins, the tight end. We've talked a little bit about him, but
Yeah.
um, is is he one of the guys you're most excited about? I mean, it's obviously a position of need. Is it where they need they? I mean, at some point they have to have a tight end, you would think. But is Zach Atkins a guy that you think can be that guy for them?
He better be. I think early signs he's very competitive, so
Yeah,
that's a good place to start. We were very high on Shimon Mateer, this time
yeah,
last year too, and that we were gonna about to get him for an interview, and then all of a sudden he wasn't a Buff anymore. So
yeah, yeah.
if you'll remember that from last spring, and then he went
Well,
on
and,
to have
and
a
2 years ago, Seydou Traore,
yep, yep,
Zico, we
yeah,
were excited about him as well.
and we're going to learn a lot about how they want to play football this year, in my opinion, about how they choose to utilize that tight end position. I did see a video of Caden Salter throwing with true freshman Corbin Lazier. Again, that's a
Mhm.
guy I don't expect to contribute at all this year. He's very thin. You know what I mean? That's a for what they need. You got to be able to stick your nose in there and block. And Atkins right now shows signs of being able to do that, but if that's the only guy they add at that position and they're putting their faith into Savell Smalls to do that as
Yeah,
the other tight end and not factoring in a potential injury, I don't know how serious I think they are about running the football, right? Like for me that's just going to be, my own thing, but in today's college football, you watch college football playoff, you watch these elite teams, they got heavy set personnel, they don't mind moving them around. This is how you
mhm.
keep a defense on their heels, and it's not their Colorado's strength right now. So yeah, he will definitely be a guy that I'm keeping my eye on, but again, we're also talking about a guy who sticks his nose in the fire every play. The chance of injury is pretty high if you
Mhm.
intend to, utilize a guy like that. You definitely have to be deeper than they are. So, yeah, that's still a concern for me. I'll definitely have my eye there. How about you on that position?
Yeah. I mean, I think he's a guy you have to look at because he's maybe the most true tight end that they have. I think Sam Hart is you've got to. I can't write off Sam Hart yet because
Yeah.
I mean he was at Ohio State obviously lost the I mean he didn't win the starting job out of camp last year. Savell Smalls did, but then he gets hurt and really only had half a year, and so I'm looking forward to Sam Hart, seeing what he does. And between those two guys and Savell Smalls, I think there's a solid trio potentially, but I'm with you. It's like, how are they going to use them? If it's no different than it's been in the past, then what does it
You might
matter?
not easy. Then Adkins might not be here by the end of spring
Right.
because the
And
last
so,
two guys weren't.
right. And I think they're a little bit different in that both of those, I mean, Atkins and Mateer were pass catching, tight ends at their previous spots who
You mean
would look,
Triore,
yeah, what I say?
Adkins?
Oh yeah, sorry. So Triori and Mateo were pass catching tight ends their previous stops, and they were looking to do the same here, if not better. And if I'm not mistaken, Atkins didn't catch a lot of passes at Northwest Missouri. It was just kind of he's been a blocking tight end that is looking for something different here, and you know
Welcome home.
yeah. And so I think he caught passes, but I don't think it was like didn't Mateo or no Traore didn't he catch like 50 passes at Arkansas State
Yeah, but
one year?
that's also super rare in today's college
Yeah,
football
I
for the
know
most
that,
part.
but like Mateer was like a 30 catch guy. I don't think Atkins has ever been like that. And so yeah, it's a
You
little
mean
bit
20
different.
good ones?
Yeah. And look, I remember like a guy like Sean Irwin, several years ago, I thought a pretty good tight end for the Buffs and caught about what 12 to 15 passes in a season. Even that, I'd take that, I'd take a Sean Irwin on this team.
Hey, man, I'm knocking on wood right now.
So we'll see what happens. Anything else you want to go over this week? And obviously next week we're going to go a little bit more in depth as we preview spring. Anything more you want to talk about this week?
No, no. I think that's pretty good. Before we get to our full spring preview, I would just say, here we go again, and I'm looking forward to meeting all the new personalities,
Mhm.
coaching staff, players. Well, I'm looking forward to meeting whoever they give us. So
As
we'll
many as we
see.
can.
I can't
Yeah.
wait to I can't wait to get into it and eventually get to the spring game where we'll have a chance to see what the post Shadur Travis era looks like here.
Yeah, and it's going to be a unique spring as we started off talking about combine stuff. The last couple of springs we haven't really had to pay much attention to the NFL draft at the same time as spring ball, but
Well,
certainly
you
that's
haven't.
well, yeah. I mean, for Buffs fans, the Buffs fans,
Yes, I know.
and
I
those
know
covering the
what you
Buffs,
meant. I know what you meant.
you've covered Broncos. I get it. But as far as the Buffs, there's been no reason to really pay attention to the draft that much. Other than I know last year there was a hope that Xavier Weaver, would get drafted, but he did not. And so, but this year, obviously, there's gonna be a lot of eyes from Buff Nation on the draft, and so it's gonna be a fun spring. I think a lot to get to for the Buffs. I mean, there's a lot to take care of as this team transitions, but also seeing some Buffs drafted. It's gonna be the best draft CU's had in a long time. I mean, the year that Nate Solder and Jimmy Smith were drafted in the first round, what was that, 2011?
Something like
I
that.
think it was
Yeah.
2011 was the last time there was two first round draft picks. I think those were the last two first round picks from CU, and they were both in the
Yes.
same year. And Jimmy was a later round pick. I think Nate was like around 11 or 12, picked in the
Mm.
11th and 12th spot, and Jimmy was in the 20s. This is going to be, arguably the best first round, CU's ever had. So it'll be fun. It's going to be a fun spring.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And I get to see your ugly mug again. So that'll be
Yeah.
good.
Well, we'll look forward to it, and we'll see you
All right,
again
buddy.
on Monday, Matt, as we do more of a full preview of spring ball.